now that we have a good understanding of the mystery of the beast, we can now go to chapter 13 and start studying it verse by verse. So what I want you to do is just open up your Bible to chapter 13. And let's look at the first two verses, and we're going to go verse by verse up to verse number 10. But we're going to start with the first two, verses 1 and 2. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his authority in his throne and great authority. Now, we need to make sure that we keep this in context, because chapter 13 is not a new vision. It's actually a continuation of chapter 12. In fact, what I'd like to do is I'd like to read the last verse in chapter 12 and the first verse in chapter 13, so you'll see what I mean when I say that chapter 13 is a continuation of chapter 12. Let's read the last verse, and then we'll read the first verse in chapter 13. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman, and he went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. You see, the whole reason that the dragon is standing on the seashore is because he needs the beast to wage war against the rest of the woman's offspring. So he's standing on the shore of the sea calling forth the beast, commanding it to rise up out of the sea. Can you see how chapter 12 is now flowing into chapter 13? Good. So to make sure that we keep this in context, let me summarize the sequence of events in chapter 12, beginning with the war in heaven. Remember, the war in heaven occurs at the midpoint of the tribulation. Michael and his angels are battling Satan and his angels. And of course, Michael wins. And Satan is expelled from heaven for good. You see, contrary to what most people believe, Satan still has access to heaven. Look at verse number 10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. : Now what does a colon do? A colon introduces an explanatory clause. He's going to explain something to us here. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Now I want you to think about this verse here. Lucifer was not accusing us before he fell. Before he fell, do you think Lucifer, whose job was to worship God and lead worship in heaven, do you think that he was worshiping and saying, now look at them down there? No. We weren't even created, because actually Satan fell before man was ever created. So Lucifer wasn't accusing us before he fell. No. He only began accusing us after he fell. So this tells us that Satan has access to God in heaven, or he wouldn't be able to accuse us before God night and day. But after this war in heaven takes place, Satan is no longer going to have access to heaven. He's going to be cast down to the earth. And verse number 13 tells us that he'll be filled with rage because he's been cast down, and also because he knows he only has a short time. So he's going to direct his rage toward the woman who gave birth to the child. Now, if you remember, the woman represents Israel and the child represents Jesus. So Satan wants to take all of his anger out on the Jews. More specifically, the Jews in Judea or the Jews in Jerusalem. Now, Pastor, how do you know that? Well, we didn't find that in the book of Revelation, but when we studied the Gospels, we found out in the Olivet Discourse where Jesus was talking to his disciples about the end of the world. He said, when you see the abomination of desolation take place, and when does that happen? At the midpoint or the middle of the tribulation. When you see the abomination of desolation take place, those in Judea flee. So we know that he's going to turn his rage upon the Jews in Jerusalem. But they're going to escape to the wilderness, and they're going to be supernaturally protected by God. So when he's unable to get to them, he then is going to turn on the rest of her offspring, the 144,000 and their converts. And this is where the beast comes into the picture. As I said, the whole reason that the dragon is standing on the seashore is because he needs the beast to make war against the rest of the woman's offspring. So he is standing on the seashore, calling for the beast to rise up out of the sea. And that brings us back to verses 1 and 2 in chapter 13. And knowing that, we can now study these 10 verses. So let's go on. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. Now, by now, you should know that the beast represents the revived Roman Empire. And this empire is going to be unlike any empire before it. I say that because this empire is going to be a combination of the best characteristics of the previous kingdoms that we've studied. That's why it has 7 heads, and the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. It's combining the best traits from all the previous empires into one super empire. So 6 of the 7 heads represent past kingdoms or empires. The different body parts represent specific empires from the past. The leopard represents the Grecian Empire. The bear represents the Persian Empire. And the lion represents the Babylonian Empire. So the 7th and final kingdom will be, in a sense, the sum of all the previous kingdoms. It will be the most powerful and wicked kingdom the world has ever seen. Now, you can tell by reading the first 2 verses that this is going to be the most powerful kingdom the world has ever seen. Take America in the height of its glory and its power and multiply it by 100. That's how powerful this thing is going to be. But it's also going to be the most wicked. Now, how do I know that? I know that because it says that its power and authority comes from Satan. Look at the last part of verse 2. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. Verse 3. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Now, heads represent what? Kingdoms. Repeat after me. Heads represent kingdoms. So this is talking about one of the kingdoms, not the Antichrist. You see, a lot of scholars teach that the Antichrist is going to suffer a fatal head wound, and then he's going to be miraculously healed. Well, I can see that, and especially when we get down to a few more verses, when we're talking about the false prophet, we can see how the Antichrist might have a fatal head wound and he's going to be miraculously healed. But in this verse, it's not talking about the Antichrist. It's talking about one of the previous kingdoms, one of the heads, because heads represent kingdoms. All right? And we know which one of the kingdoms it represents because of history. Let me give you a little history lesson. Every one of the previous kingdoms that we've talked about, they were conquered and absorbed into the kingdom that conquered it, with one exception, the Roman Empire. So even though every one of the first 5 kingdoms eventually fell, in a sense they still continued on because they were absorbed into the next kingdom. The only exception was the Roman Empire. It fell, but it was not absorbed into another kingdom or another world empire. So basically, it died. And that's the fatal wound that John is talking about. But the Roman Empire will be revived in the last days. In other words, this fatal wound is going to be healed. That's why we refer to the beast as the revived Roman Empire. Verse number 4. Men worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? Now, if you were here last week, you know that Islam is going to be the one world religion. Now, I'm saying that not because that's what the Bible says. I'm saying that because if you study Islamic eschatology along with what the Bible says, you can see how it's setting up to be. In fact, the revived Roman Empire is going to be an Islamic empire. So when the Antichrist comes on the scene, Muslims are going to think that he's their Messiah. He's the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, the one they've been waiting for. But he's really going to be the Antichrist. So if Muslims believe that the Antichrist is the Mahdi, who will they believe is giving him his power? Allah, of course. So they'll think that they're worshiping Allah, but they're really worshiping the dragon. In fact, Allah is the dragon. There it is. I said it. But it's true. Allah is the dragon. And let me prove that to you. Turn to Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. We looked at this last week, but I want this to be deep in your heart. It says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High." Now, I want you to underline the word ascend. In fact, it's actually ascend above. Those two words are really a phrase that's translated from the Hebrew word Allah. So the devil is Allah, the one who wanted to ascend above God. Now, in Arabic, the word Allah actually means the God. But in Hebrew, Allah means to ascend above. So the Bible reveals who Allah really is. So the Muslims will think that they're worshiping Allah, and they are. They just don't know that Allah is Satan. And people, that's not a hard stretch of the imagination. In fact, if you study just a little bit of Islamic doctrine, you'll find out that Allah kills, steals, destroys. Those are the very things that when Jesus came along, He said, the thief comes to kill, to steal, to destroy. I've come that you might have life and that you might have life more abundantly. Now, when we go back to the Old Testament, some people point back to the Old Testament. Wait a minute, look what God did in the Old Testament. Well, that was a different dispensation. That was a dispensation of judgment, a dispensation of law until Jesus could come and fulfill the law. We now live in a dispensation of grace. But when you study Islamic doctrine, what you find out is who they are worshiping is not anything like what Yahweh is or Jehovah. Verse 5. "And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him." Now notice it says, "and there was given to him," talking about the beast. There was given to the beast a mouth. The mouth is referring to a spokesperson, a leader. Now this is very important because from this time on, the beast in John's vision can refer to one of two things. It can refer to the seventh and final kingdom, which is the revived Roman Empire, or it can refer to the Antichrist, who's the leader of the revived Roman Empire, because he's the mouth of the beast, the spokesperson, the one who rules the beast. Now, it's very important that you understand what I just said. So I'm going to say it again, but I'm going to say it in a different way. The beast in John's vision represents the Antichrist and his kingdom. So sometimes the word beast is used to refer to the Antichrist, and sometimes it's used to refer to his kingdom. The context will tell you which. So as we begin from this point on reading and it talks about the beast, we will be able to tell from the context. Is it referring to the revived Roman Empire, or is it referring to the Antichrist? Now, let me explain why the beast is used both ways. You see, during the middle of the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to be given so much authority and so much power, he won't just be the leader of the revived Roman Empire, he'll be the revived Roman Empire, because it will be an Islamic confederation or an Islamic coalition. It's going to be an Islamic empire. He will be seen as the Mahdi. He will be seen as the 12th Imam. He is the undisputed leader of it. What he says goes. And as we get a little further into this, you'll find out why all of the sudden all of the Muslims will cheer for this man. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Notice what the last part of verse number 5 says. Authority to act for 42 months was given to him. Not talking about the beast now, or not talking about the revived Roman Empire, it's talking about the Antichrist here. Now, wait a minute. It says authority to act for 42 months was given to him. I thought the Antichrist came on the scene at the beginning of the tribulation. Wasn't he the guy that was riding the white horse? When we look up there and we look at the very first seal, it says a white horse comes. And we have in there Antichrist. And we said that he's going to start this 7-year peace treaty with Israel. So isn't he the one that came on the scene at the beginning of the tribulation? Well, then why does it say that authority to act for 42 months was given to him? That's 42 months is only 3.5 years. What's the deal? Here's the deal. He does not become the absolute ruler of the revived Roman Empire until the middle of the tribulation. You see, when he first comes on the scene, he is a great politician. He is a wonderful orator. He is someone that is able to do wonderful things. And he's going to be able to come in and take a few Islamic nations and bring them together into a peace treaty with Israel and allow Israel to rebuild the temple. But the revived Roman Empire has not yet given him his authority. They haven't turned everything over to him. When he first comes in on the scene on the white horse, there's only going to be a few Islamic nations that's going to recognize him as the imam. But he does something in the middle of the tribulation that all of a sudden gets everyone's attention, and every Islamic nation in the world rises up and says, yes. Let's go to verse 6. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. All over the world, Muslims profess the Shahada. How many of you heard of the Shahada? The Shahada states that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Now, some of them say there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his servant and messenger. They say this to distinguish their God from the Jews' God and the Christians' God. And I'm really glad that they do, because we do not serve the same God. Let me state that again. We do not serve the same God. We serve Jehovah, also known as Yahweh. Yes, he has different names that he's revealed himself by. When Moses said, when I go to Egypt and they're going to ask who sent you, who do I say has sent me? And he said, you just tell them that I am has sent you. But when he revealed his name, he came along and said, I am Jehovah. I'm Jehovah Tsidkenu, your righteousness. I'm Jehovah Mekadesh, your sanctification. I am Jehovah Jireh, your provider. I am Jehovah Shammah, which means I'm always present. I am Jehovah Nissi, I'm your victory. But I want you to understand with all of those things, Rapha and Rohi and all of those, he starts with Jehovah. He is Jehovah, also known as Yahweh. They serve Allah, the one who wanted to ascend above Jehovah but failed. And who is Allah? Allah is the dragon, the one who gives authority to the beast. So naturally, the Antichrist receives his authority from the dragon. And therefore, he is going to blaspheme the one true God. But he's also going to blaspheme, according to this verse, those who live in heaven. And who would that be? Who lives in heaven? Christians. Before this time, the rapture will occur. The Christians will go to heaven. They will be living in heaven. This verse says that he not only blasphemes God, but he blasphemes those who live in heaven. He blasphemes Christians. So, the Antichrist is going to blaspheme the one true God and those who believe in his Son, Jesus Christ. And the Muslim world will cheer him on. Verse 7. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Now this tells us the Antichrist is not going to be content with just blaspheming Christians. No. He will not be content until he makes war with them on those that dwell upon the earth. In other words, he's going to hunt Christians down to murder them. So those who weren't raptured are going to be given a choice. And you need to understand this. If you're living on the earth because you weren't raptured, you weren't prepared, you will be given a choice. In the second half of the tribulation, you either have a choice to become a Muslim or die. And that goes right along with Islamic eschatology. Islamic eschatology teaches that when the Mahdi comes, He will establish an Islamic empire over the entire world. And he will convert the people. But those who he can't convert, he will kill. Islamic eschatology teaches that. That is not me taking out some little remote references or some fanatical Muslim. If you read and study Islamic eschatology, when the Mahdi comes, he will convert the world to the Islamic faith. And those he cannot convert, he will kill. Now, the last part of verse number 7 is interesting. Look at the last part. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Now, most scholars take this to mean that the Antichrist will rule the world. And the scriptures seem to bear that out. But it's not that way until the second half of the tribulation. During the first half of the tribulation, it won't be that way. You have all these different nations and they're kind of doing their own thing. But as we began to see the seals take place and we began to see the trumpets take place, if you thought this economic crisis that we're in is something now, you haven't seen anything. We're going to have an economic crisis. We're going to have a climate crisis. We're going to have all types of a crisis. But there's going to be one person that's going to show that he is such a capable leader in what he's doing in his little area that the world's going to be fascinated by it. And so, this person, at the second half of the tribulation, is going to receive his full power and authority. Now again, if you've been reading and going along with me and processing this information, you know that it's not until the middle of the tribulation that the beast rises up from the sea. Did the beast rise up from the sea in the first half? No. The seventh trumpet blew. When the seventh trumpet blew, we were at the midpoint of the tribulation. The war in heaven takes place. Satan is cast down. We also saw in chapter 11, the two prophets are killed. And then we see the abomination of desolation take place. So, the question is, why would the beast rise up at the second half of the tribulation? It's because of what I just said. The abomination of desolation. You see, in the first half of the tribulation, the Antichrist is just a ruler over three empires or three kingdoms. Remember, he plucks up three. And he is the king over that. They're submitting to him and he does such a good job. And he has this peace treaty with Israel. But in the middle of the tribulation, the abomination of desolation takes place. The book of Daniel tells us that. The Mahdi, the 12th Imam, will go into the temple and he will declare himself to be God and demand to be worshiped. And at that point, because of the world, and I showed you the video and you can go study the statistics, it's only continuing on. The Islamic faith is growing 4 times faster than Christianity. Did you know that? 4 times faster than Christianity. Every year, it's growing 4 times faster than Christianity. So by that time, it's going to be an Islamic world. And when this man who came along, and there's going to be this fanatical group that says he's the imam. The other Muslims are going to sit back that's not part of those 3 nations. And they're going to watch him. And they're going to go, ooh, I don't like what he did. But the others know what he's doing. Oh, it says he's going to come in and he's going to convert many of the Jews, and that's what he's doing. But when he comes in at the middle of the tribulation and commits the abomination of desolation, they're all going to go, yes! He is the imam. And they are on board. The 10 kingdoms are Islamic kingdoms, and they're going to give their authority to him for one brief moment. Look at Revelation 17, verses 12 through 13. The 10 horns of the beast are 10 kings who have not yet risen to power. They will be appointed to their kingdoms for one brief moment to reign with the beast. They will all agree to give him their power and authority. The brief moment is for 3.5 years, 42 months. Verse number 8. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. Again, verse number 8 is telling us that you will have a choice if you're not raptured. You can either become a Muslim and worship the Mahdi and the dragon who has given him his authority, or you can be persecuted. So guess what? Everyone becomes a Muslim except for a few Christians. Those who became Christians after the rapture, because they know better. But everyone else will worship the beast. Look at verse 8 again. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. All whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. So everyone will worship the beast. Allah. Verses 9 and 10. He who has an ear, let him hear. Anyone is to go... Let me say that again. He who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. This is not a riddle. The first part of verse number 10, not verse 9, verse number 10, is actually a Hebrewism. Notice what it says. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This is a Hebrewism. It is taken from Jeremiah, the 15th chapter, verse number 2, and it refers to divine providence. Look at Jeremiah chapter 15, verse number 2 up on the screens. And if they say to you, but where can we go? You tell them, this is what the Lord says. Those who are destined for death, to death. Those who are destined to war, to war. Those who are destined for famine, to famine. Those who are destined for captivity, to captivity. Now, if you'll notice, I did not say this is a quote from Jeremiah 15:2. This is a reference to it. It refers to divine providence in the book of Jeremiah. If you remember, Jeremiah was telling them, you don't understand, God's bringing judgment. You need to submit to His judgment. There is nothing you can do about it. This is divine providence. Well, that's exactly what this verse 10 is about. This is talking about divine providence. The end is going to play out just as God said it would. The Antichrist is going to be given power and authority to make war with the saints for 42 months, 3.5 years. Those who become Christians after the rapture, they will be persecuted, and there is no way to stop it. Those destined to captivity will go into captivity. Those destined to die will die. No ands, no ifs, no buts. No walking on your faith or talking on your faith or confessing it. This is divine providence. God said this will happen. Those who are destined to go into captivity for standing up for Jesus will go into captivity. Those who are destined to die for standing up for Jesus will be destined to die. You cannot change it. That's what He's telling us. We're coming to a point in the world where there is no ifs, ands, or buts. When the 12th Imam comes, when the Mahdi comes, he is the Antichrist, but the Islamic world will recognize him as their Messiah. And their eschatology teaches that he will convert the entire world into an Islamic nation or an Islamic world. And those he can't convert, he will kill. And so God is giving us fair warning. He's telling us now, while there's still time to do something about it, that those who will go into captivity will go into captivity. And those who are destined to die will die. And you will not be able to change it. So, notice the last part of verse 10. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. Wow. In other words, what he's telling us, if you miss the rapture, then you better be faithful to the end. And by all means, don't fear the one who can kill the body, but fear the one who can destroy both the body and the soul. Do not worship the Antichrist or the dragon who gives authority to the Antichrist, Allah. Do not take his mark. Stay faithful to the end. Those who stay faithful will get to go to heaven. Those who don't, will be destined to hell. This is what it's coming to. We hit this in chapter 13. Now, in verse number 11, we will continue on and we will see the false prophet. We'll see what his job is. We'll also find out what Islamic eschatology has to say about this person. And we'll see how it's all going to play out, just the way that God said it would.